mausoleums in the Soviet Union, housing 3 such important historical figures that after their death, it was decided not to bury, but to embalm them. The first one was built in Vinnytsia for the surgeon Pirogov. Within the second one in Moscow lays the leader of the revolution, Vladimir Lenin. But few know of the third one. Odessa Oblast is a small town in Kotovsk. Here, there is the crypt mausoleum holding the embalmed body of Grigory Kotovsky, legendary Red Commander of the Civil War. This mausoleum was built immediately after the mysterious murder of Grigory Kotovsky, and buried inside of it, along with the body, remains a hidden mystery of the death of a man more influential than Stalin. Odessa Oblast in August of 1925, Shebanka village, where Olga Kotovskaya was in the final month of her pregnancy. She suffered, often, from pain and insomnia. That long, hot night, she could not sleep as she waited for her husband Grigory to return. At around 2 a.m., the wife of the Red Commander finally managed to fall asleep. Suddenly, Olga awakened, startled. Clutching her stomach, Olga ran to the window. Outside her window, in the street, a crowd flocked. People surrounded a body. Sprawled on the ground, it was Olga's husband, Grigory Kotovsky. Shebanka villagers were terrified. Who would dare to kill one of the most influential people of the Soviet Union? During his life, Grigory Kotovsky was dubbed the chieftain from hell. Although a thug and a murderer, as Russia's Red Commander, Stalin regarded him to be the bravest among the humble Soviet commanders and most humble amongst the brave. What was never mentioned in the Soviet propaganda was who Grigory Kotovsky truly was, and who, in fact, needed his death. Olga Kotovskaya lay crying, grasping her pregnant stomach. Her new daughter, Lenotchka, born only a few days later, would never know her father. The wife of the dead Komkor was stunned by what followed. While her relatives collected around her to calm her, the former commander's comrade Zayda Meyer silently entered her home. Unlike the others, Meyer did not attempt to comfort her, nor did he offer his help. Instead, he knelt down beside her and begged forgiveness. It was he who killed her husband, his friend Grigory Kotovsky. Olga Petrovna became hysterical, driving this murderer from her home. In the confusion, Meyer vanished and a few hours later was arrested. News of the Kotovsky murder reached Moscow and flew from mouth to mouth, creating a huge scandal. Kotovsky had been loved by millions of Soviet citizens. However, something quite unusual occurred. The death of the Komkor was simply ignored. Only a single newspaper reported the murder in Shebanka, the Pravda. We managed to find a rare issue stored in the newspaper department of the Vernadsky National Library in the Ukraine. On the night of the 6th of August, it reports, at the Sovkhoz Shebanka, 30 miles away from Odessa, the untimely death of a member of the Union, the Ukrainian and Moldovan Central Election Commission, commander of the Cavalry Corps, Comrade Kotovsky. Why was the manslaughter of this legendary Komkor so modestly reported? Just a single mention of no more than an untimely death. Even the murderer's name was not specified. The day following the murder of Komkor, a group of embalmers arrived in Odessa from Moscow. It was headed by Professor Vorobyov, who in 1924 embalmed the body of Vladimir Lenin. Medics began working on the body of Kotovsky. Meanwhile, not far from Odessa, a mausoleum was being erected. In 1941, the mausoleum of Kotovsky was left to its fate. Unlike Lenin's mausoleum, this one was not removed from the town during the German offensive on Moscow, and the first thing the Nazis did on their arrival at Kotovsk was to destroy the Comcorps mausoleum and dispose of Kotovsky's body. Coming up, whose way did this legendary Comcorps stand in? Who gave the order that executed murderer Zayda Meyer? Why do historians now call Meyer the first Soviet killer? We will meet the grandson of Grigory Kotovsky and find out what secret his grandfather had been hiding his whole life. We will also learn why all the investigation materials mysteriously disappeared after the death of Kotovsky, to be confiscated to the special funds of the security service. And we will find a place where today lay the bones of the legendary Comcorps. Chabanka village near Odessa. 2 gunshots murdered the Red Commander, the man of legend, Grigory Kotovsky. The killer, his comrade, Zayda Meyer. However, his motive remains unknown. At first, Meyer insisted the murder of Kotovsky was no accident. Raging jealousy he claimed as his motive, because of an alleged affair between the Comcorps and his wife. During an interrogation, she proceeded to deny her husband's allegation and testified that there had been no intimate relationship between the two. The most probable cause for his murder and the likely events of that fateful night were soon to be discovered. Yes, the fact was, he did slay Kotovsky. Nevertheless, this more likely happened because the Comcorps stood in the way of Meyer's career. At that time, Meyer had been security chief at a sugar factory. During the trial, he admitted that he wanted to become the head of this factory. But Kotovsky did not want to promote him, and this resulted in the Comcorps slaughter. This became the story behind the murder. Why then, after such a deviant act, did the frightened murderer wind up on his knees begging for the forgiveness of Kotovsky's wife Olga? Nevertheless, the murder investigators accepted this motive as true. A swift trial followed, but the verdict shocked everyone. By law, Meyer should have been shot, with his family deported to Siberia. But the assassin of the great commander was not executed, simply sentenced to a 10-year imprisonment. What's more, although this was a time that even minor thieves were executed in this country, 3 years after this verdict, Kotovsky's assassin was mysteriously released for exemplary behavior. Quite extraordinary that during this morally deficient time, crammed with brutality and loss of millions of lives in the First World and Civil Wars, with a country so swathed in human blood and life of such little value that the state so easily reversed itself to spare assassin Meyer Zayda. Grigory Kotovsky and Zayda Meyer met in 1918. At that time, Kotovsky had been an underground Bolshevik agent and a bandit chased by police. And Meyer was owner of the best brothel in Odessa, one of the richest men in the city. Zayda Meyer was one of Odessa's first slaveholders of whites. Girls from Odessa and the Ukraine were by force shipped to Turkish harems and brothels, dependent territories of the Turkish Empire, Egypt, North America, and to Europe. Zayda Meyer headed over a filthy business. Ironically, even his own sister and wife were prostitutes in his organization. Fleeing from a police chase, Kotovsky found a place to hide within Meyer's brothel, where he found protection while in pursuit. Meyer concealed the fugitive for several days, while feeding and caring of his needs. At this time, the two became friends.
Zayda Meyer lived in this house in 1918. However, 4 years later, Meyer became homeless and without a livelihood. This time, Kotovsky returned the debt and found Meyer a place to work. However, what ultimately made the former owner of the brothel betray his comrade to pull the trigger of a gun not once, but twice? Coming up, the true life story of bandit and comcore Kotovsky. What linked Kotovsky with Meyer? Why would historians call the owner of the Odessa brothel the first killer of the Soviet Union? Also, an incredible find, Kotovsky's autobiography. In 1924, 1 year prior to his death, Grigory Kotovsky wrote a manuscript, his memoirs. However, his disclosed birth date had been falsified, along with 6 years of his life conveniently left out of the document. But why would Kotovsky need to deceive? Grigory Kotovsky claimed in his memoirs that his birth year was 1887 in the Moldovan town of Hincesti. But historians are certain that Kotovsky lied. He was actually born in 1881, 6 years earlier than the date in his autobiography. What secret was the legendary comcore hiding? What happened during these 6 concealed years? It turns out that for 6 years, until 1917, the legendary commander had been a criminal. A huge number of modern adventurers and criminals correct some of the dates, which may include their birth, and hide some details. Why would Kotovsky do such a thing? Perhaps to hide some previous convictions? For example, Kotovsky attempted to conceal information about his first conviction. As for the more recent criminal convictions, he constructed a tale told to fellow Bolsheviks that he defended the poor and shared the spoils with the common folk of Bessarabia and the Kherson province. Here is the real story behind the life of the Red Comcore, later discovered through research. Kotovsky had been a descendant of Moldavia. In his early childhood, Grigory fell down some stairs, which may have contributed to his obtaining a stutter. This caused the boy to become reserved and rather shy, rarely communicating with his peers. He, however, adored reading and liked to dream. In his dreams, Kotovsky imagined himself the famous robber of Sherwood Forest, Robin Hood, or pirate Blackbeard, sometimes Tarzan. To this unhealthy-spirited child, all of these heroic characters seem to be attainable divinities. There were 5 children in the Kotovsky family, with Grigory the youngest and the most impressionable. The sudden death of his mother led to the young boy's first attack of epilepsy soon after her funeral. Little Grigory Kotovsky watched his mother die. It was difficult enough she died, but he was forced to witness this. And again, this coincided with his first attack of epilepsy. This seems to have contributed to the struggles he encountered throughout his life. He stammered badly, and he became uncomfortably nervous. At the age of 14, the boy carried on in life with epilepsy, with the stigma of a stutter. Then he had lost his last close comfort, his father. Now he would have to care for himself, and so he enrolled himself into a school of agriculture, where he turned much of his attention to his body and strength. As a result, this former weakling became the strongest amongst his peers. His character hardened, and he began to control everything with his will. People around Kotovsky began to respect, even fear him. In her memoirs, Kotovsky's sister Sophia reveals that at that time, no one could beat Grigory. He could easily put anyone who dared to mock his stuttering defect in their place.
Kotovsky became a statuesque boy, actively into sport. While he was fond of reading, he revered his adventure books. His favorite, Tarzan. The book captivated him. Naturally, it also influenced his adventurous character and the way he perceived his actions. Kotovsky experienced his first love. To receive the diploma of a specialized school, he had to undergo some on-job training. Grigory became an assistant manager of the estate of Skopovsky, the landlord. The landlord's wife became attracted immediately to this self-assured, handsome student. Soon, they began to meet secretly. However, the affair was split up by the husband. Landlord Skopovsky discovered the affair. As Kotovsky recalled in his writings on discovery, Skopovsky raised his whip and struck him with all his might in the face. What occurred next sealed forever Kotovsky's fate. In response, Kotovsky counteracted and began to beat the landlord until stopped by the servants. The landlord then ordered his men to beat Grigory almost to death, and then undressed him and threw him out of the estate. Nobody ever humiliated Kotovsky like that again. Insulted and beaten, he walked off. After that, Grigory tried twice to locate a job and briefly worked for other landlords, but his bad reputation haunted him. At another job, he was accused of feigning documents, then of stealing the money. This caused a police chase, and Kotovsky had to hide. The next 2 years, having no job or money, he knocked about North Moldova, in Bessarabia, where he often committed petty thefts. It was here that he first acquainted with the SS, activists and members of a terrorist group banned in the Russian Empire, a socialist revolutionary party. The group provided Kotovsky with clothes, food and accommodation at their secret address. Grigory found much in common with them. First and foremost, a hatred for the regime. It was then when Kotovsky felt like a hero from his favorite children's books, Robin Hood. With his help, dozens of estates in Bessarabia were plundered. Robber Kotovsky became wanted as a dangerous criminal, a reward placed on his head. It took several months for the elusive Kotovsky to decide to secede from the SS to plunder landlords on his own. Kotovsky found himself 20 reliable men, former peasants, prisoners, workers, even circus actors. Landlords feared and hated Kotovsky, and his plundering attacks became legendary. One of Odessa's landlords boasted he was not afraid of Kotovsky because he built an alarm button connected to the police station onto the floor of his cabinet. When Kotovsky learned about this self-assured landlord, he effortlessly broke into his estate. Instead of commanding the man to raise his hands in the air, Kotovsky, with a smile, told the frightened landlord to raise his feet. "Feet on the table! I said now!" It is not known whether he actually shared the money with the poor peasants, but people literally prayed for this audacious robber. Kotovsky constantly stated he was Robin Hood, that he robbed from the rich and gave to the poor. But this was not entirely true, because he and his closest friends accumulated a large quantity of loot. After several years of pillaging and collecting, Kotovsky became rich. He dined at the best restaurants, appeared in public, and no longer talked about his political preferences. But his former friends, the SS, saw through him. To avenge him, they informed the police of his secret address, where the bandit leader hid. Kotovsky was later arrested. At the trial, he proudly christened himself Robin Hood and claimed his actions to be dictated by his honorable sense of justice. The judges, however, were not amused, and he was sentenced to 12 years of hard labor. Chisinau prison. From the earliest days of his imprisonment, Kotovsky devised an escape plan. After his big trial, he became popular as a convict. Women often came to visit him in prison. These women were romantic fans, swayed by this famous noble bandit and his tales. He was aware of his charisma, his pizzazz. He realized just how handsome he was. He became a woman's man. In his lifetime, he had a number of passions: books, sports, horses, and of course, women. As a matter of fact, women would save the romantic bandit several times. One particularly fanatical female visitor helped Kotovsky implement his plan of escape by sneaking in a pack of cigarettes laced with opium, a lady's gun, a file baked in bread, and a thin silk cord. Everything Kotovsky needed to escape. So one night, Kotovsky gave the cigarettes to the guards. Once they were out of commission, he then soared through iron bars and made his daring escape. This, however, was just the start of his prison saga. Kotovsky lasted a mere few days outside of the prison walls before he was once again arrested. Brought this time to Nikolaev, a strict security prison, and from there he was transported to the east of Russia. Kotovsky sat in prison 10 more years. He built, along with his fellow inmates, the Amur Railway and worked in the Nachinsk mines. Victor Fatelberg Blank, researcher of the gangster world of Odessa, believes that during his prison time, future legendary Komkor Kotovsky was not an inmate who just sat passively around. It's more likely that he veiled his activities while behind bars, and this helped him to build an underworld reputation in the criminal sphere. In this circle, he belonged to its elite. Not only did criminals become aware of it, but also the police. This is a description of Kotovsky, which followed him during his transportation. Height, 174 centimeters, strong constitution, staggers while walking, round head, brown eyes, stammers. Kotovsky had tattooed eyelids, and that indicated he belonged to the highest hierarchy of the gangster world. His tattoos consisted of dots encircling his eyelids in a figure of 8. When he became a Red Commander, Grigory Kotovsky wanted them removed. But in those times, there were no specialists. And so he had to go through life with them on his face. And when he died, the tattoos went with him. Such tattoos thus implicate him and his life as a bandit and underworld leader. It was 1913. The alarm sounded at the Nachinsk mines. Escape. Among the prisoners, one was missing. The underworld leader, Grigory Kotovsky, escaped, killing 2 guards in the process. This time, he was never found. He spent 2 more years in hiding, working as a loader, and finally appeared in Odessa. By now, Grigory was 32, no longer a young outcast student, nor Robin Hood. He was a former prisoner and experienced gangster. Out of prison, he carefully prepared for brand new attacks. Within a few years, Kotovsky became a terror in Odessa's gangster world. It was believed he could read minds simply by looking into other people's eyes. He would learn about people by using his eyes, which he did often. He would categorize men and choose the ones he liked to be part of his crew. In those days, Odessa was the crime capital of the Russian Empire. Numerous underworld gangsters operated in this region. The police simply had no time to catch all of them. They were looking specifically for Kotovsky, searching all his secret addresses. But Kotovsky lived out in the open at the best hotel of Odessa, Bessarabia. Before each raid, Grigory carefully disguised himself. Every time he went out, it was in a new image. Kotovsky was renowned throughout Odessa, an extremely famous figure.
Newspapers through the years 1915 through 1917 were loaded with his pictures. This meant that he could have easily been identified. Nonetheless, if he attended the theatre or went out, he would simply stick on his face a beard or a moustache and become incognito. These facts of Kotovsky's life were to be later concealed within the Soviet Union's official history books. And Kotovsky himself purely eliminated the years from his own memoirs. What remained were only high-flying, blurry lines. By force and terror, I took away material possession from exploiters and gave them to those who needed these riches. Without knowing of the party, I was already a Bolshevik. 3 years of freedom from jail equated to 3 years of debauchery and plundering. But by 1916, his luck ran out. Legendary robber caught. Romantic bandit Kotovsky brought into police station. Robin Hood of Bessarabia was taken. These became the headlines making Odessa's newspapers. Police triumphed. It was during a raid that Kotovsky fell into their trap and finally found himself behind bars. Primorsky Boulevard 7. In 1916, fates of thousands of prisoners were decided here. In this building was the Military District Court of Odessa, and it was here that Grigory Kotovsky was tried and convicted. 1916. The Russian Empire was engaged in the First World War, lasting 2 years. The country was in a state of martial law. All death sentences were to be approved by the commander of the Western Front, General Brusilov. As Kotovsky awaited his execution, he wrote a petition for clemency. But rather than addressing his petition to the general, he sent it to the general's wife, Brusilova. She read a letter overflowing with repentance and written as if a dramatic work, and felt remorse for the handsome bandit. A few weeks later, General Brusilov replaced Kotovsky's death penalty with life imprisonment. 1917. Revolution. The provisional government leads the country out of war, with political prisoners released. However, convicted of robbery, former condemned Kotovsky does not receive this amnesty. The civil war bursts out and the front is destroyed. Ruin and famine spreads across the country. Suddenly, from the prison cell, criminal, bandit and recidivist Kotovsky requests that he be sent out to the front. He wishes to atone for his past with his own blood. This is incredible, but a man with this heinous past, once convicted to die, is released. Kotovsky passed the cavalry regiment military training in one crash course and went on to war as a private. In a few years, he became a commander, then joined the Bolsheviks. This is where his talents became fully appreciated. Here, his own brigade took under command, and with a mission to destroy the remnants of the UNR army and Denikin's forces. He immediately introduced his new brigade to iron discipline. Horses must be of the same color. Soldiers must wear clean and expensive uniforms. Men must do morning exercises, then douse themselves with cold water. Kotovsky's orders were not open for discussion. Desertion, rape, or murder of peasants were punishable by execution. 1918. Odessa's rule is in constant change. The city becomes white, then red, and then independent. But despite everything, Kotovsky remains in Odessa. Sometimes he has to hide from his pursuers. It is during this time a certain man visits the best brothel in the city. He is met by the owner of the establishment, Zayda Meyer, who asks what kind of woman the client wants. This visitor answers that he is not interested in a prostitute, but in need of a key to the attic. Meyer, recognizing Kotovsky, hands him the key.
The brigade commander spends a few days in hiding within this attic, and before he departs the establishment, he informs Meyer that he is indebted to him. 1920, Kotovsky is the best commander of the Red Army. On his chest are decorations of 3 orders of the Red Banner and the honorable revolutionary weapon, the sword. These are the highest awards in the Red Army. They were received for the destruction of the army's remnants in the Ukrainian National Republic, for the liberation of Tiraspol, for the suppression of the peasant uprising in Tambov province, and for the termination of the army of Ataman Tutunik. Coming up, historians are certain Stalin himself is involved in the murder of Kotovsky. We will visit Kotovsk, find the tomb of the commander, and learn why Grigory Kotovsky was slayed. (1921). The Civil War has ended. This year, the Bolsheviks liquidate the last brothel in Odessa. Zayda Meyer is left without work. And so he pays his own visit to Kotovsky, who owes him a favor. And the commander appoints Meyer as security chief of one of the sugar factories. December the 30th, 1922. On the map appears a new country, the largest in the world, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. The Civil War is over, and Lenin becomes the first leader of the country. But after 2 years, Lenin dies, and in his place comes Joseph Stalin. Stalin begins a struggle for the sole control of the country. He doesn't need any rebellious leaders. During this time, the country is led by its military men, many of them with dark pasts, murderers, robbers, and gang leaders. Grigory Kotovsky is among his chief people. Out of Kotovsky's advice to Stalin, Moldavian Autonomous Socialist Republic is added into the Soviet Union. Kotovsky himself becomes its informal leader. His aim is to capture and unite all the lands of Bessarabia, even those belonging to Romania. However, the CC does not want war with Romania. Kremlin politicians, however, are too busy with the internecine wars to protest. Stalin, by eliminating his rivals, is advancing to a sole rule. Kotovsky is forbidden to aggravate this political situation. This enrages him so much that the Comcorps leaves his corpus and goes on holiday with his wife and son to Jabanka village in Odessa Oblast. 1925. Kotovsky is now 44, a married man and father. He has a son. A few days later, his daughter is to be born. Their holiday is interrupted by a telegram from Moscow. The People's Commissar of the USSR appoints Kotovsky his deputy. In this country, ruled by military men, he is destined to become the Prime Minister. Grigory Kotovsky celebrates his victory. He hastily packs his things and gets ready to go to Moscow. But in the evening of August the 6th, on the eve of his departure, Kotovsky is invited to a party. 2 a.m. Kotovsky returns home. He turns into his yard. In just a few steps, he will be at home. Suddenly, Kotovsky notices Meyer. Comcorps is pleasantly surprised. He doesn't expect to see his friend in Jabanka. He stretches out his hand in greeting. Meyer also stretches out his hand, but with a revolver in it. Turning away and clenching his teeth, Meyer pulls the trigger. Kotovsky falls to the ground, but he was still alive. Then Meyer takes a second shot. This shot is fatal.
On this site of cottages, there was once Old Chabanka, the village where Kotovsky was killed. Meyer, who murdered the legendary commander, was sentenced not to execution, but to 10 years of imprisonment. Of the 10 years, the killer remained in prison for only 3. He was released for exemplary behavior. But Meyer didn't enjoy his freedom for long. Men of Kotovsky awarded him with a death sentence. Modern historians claim in the mid-20s, Stalin began to consolidate and gain sole power in the USSR. He managed to remove his main competitor, Leon Trotsky, from leadership. Among all the Red commanders, only Frunze and Kotovsky remained disobedient to him. It was Grigory Kotovsky who Stalin feared the most. He knew he was a cruel and influential man, subversively supported by the army, and this meant he needed to get rid of his opponent. Kotovsky was an extremely devious person, difficult for the authorities to control, and he was connected to the criminal world, where he maintained strong ties. This man was connected to business. What's more, this man was attempting to make himself a leader of the Moldavian Autonomous Republic. More than likely, he would become leader of all Bessarabia as well. Stalin himself would not be able to accuse Kotovsky of treason to execute him. The soldiers trusted their commander way too much. Thus, a move like this would likely have caused a military coup. But by hiring an assassin, he could get the job done cleanly. What's more, this had to be a person from the commander's surroundings, otherwise it would not be possible to reach him. Therefore, Stalin hired Zayda Meyer. However, how he convinced this poor former owner of a brothel to commit this heinous crime is still a great mystery. Historians remain certain that this was the first contract murder in the Soviet Union, and Meyer was the first Soviet killer, and the client was Stalin personally. Elena Kotovskaya named her son in honor of his grandfather Grigory. We have managed to meet him and learn exactly whom he and his mother believed to be guilty of the murder of the legendary Komkor. I believe it was actually Stalin, because he wiped out so much of the Soviet army and intelligentsia. Despite the fact that he was a shrewd man, he'd done many horrible things while he was in power. He was a terrible dictator, and Stalin could not tolerate competition. We know Frunze died on the operating table. He wasn't through, he was killed. There are also rumors that suggest it was on the orders of Stalin. A number of other prominent public figures were killed too. The grandson of the Komkor has said that immediately after the murder of Kotovsky, all of the remaining investigation materials were then transported to Moscow. I know that Stalin came into power very shrewdly, and he managed to push aside all other major public figures to come to power. Apparently, he was a cardinal. He already had some kind of power even back then. He assumed that if Grigory was replaced by Frunze, he could be dangerous. And so Frunze was killed. We head now to Buzula, a small town in the Odessa Oblast. This is where Grigory Kotovsky was buried. Now, the town of Buzula no longer exists. 73 years ago, it was renamed Kotovsk, a town in Odessa Oblast. It was here, where before 1941, that a mausoleum held the remains of Kotovsky. The Komkor was buried with honors. At his funeral gathered thousands of soldiers. His wife stood near the coffin. She was about to give birth.
when the salute was given in honor of the Comcorps, Olga Kotovskaya went into labor. The last child of Kotovsky, his daughter Lenochka, was born and never saw her father alive. The child, Olga Petrovna, would only see her father behind the glass in the mausoleum. However, the embalmed body of the Comcorps was not destined to remain there long. During the war, it disappeared and the mausoleum was destroyed. In the heart of Kotovsk, we found a monument. It was established in 1965 in honor of the legendary Comcorps. Previously, here stood the mausoleum. It was destroyed by the Nazis in 1941, while the commander's body was thrown into an ordinary pit. Eventually, he was found by simple workers, and in 1944 reburied. It turned out that here remains an underground portion of the destroyed mausoleum, and in it finally found peace Robin Hood of Odessa and legendary Comcorps Grigory Kotovsky. We received a unique opportunity to get inside the mausoleum, which has been closed for many decades. The bones of Kotovsky rest in this coffin. Today, Kotovsky's grave is a zinc coffin and a dirty blanket which covers the coffin. Under the blanket, there is a skull of the man who once was the storm of the Odessa raiders, Bessarabian Robin Hood, and the legendary Comcorps. A few months later, Frunze dies on the operating table. As the Politburo reported, due to an unsuccessful surgery. So why was Frunze sent to that operation? It's a fact that Stalin had already been strengthening his power, and it's clear that he didn't need the independent Red Army. After his removal of Kotovsky and Frunze, there continued a series of murders and repressed stories within the Union. 1936. Shot. Grigory Zinoviev, the instigator of Stalin's appointment to the post of General Secretary of the CC of the Communist Party. 1937. Killed. Marshal of the Red Army, Mikhail Tukhachevsky, and a member of the Politburo, Grigory Ordzhonikidze. 1940. Killed. Stalin's chief opponent, Leon Trotsky. In total, before the Second World War in the Soviet Army, 500 commanders of the highest rank were eliminated. And the first warning signal sounded on August 6, 1925, in a seaside village of Chebanka. Less than 100 years ago, the Soviet Union was mourning the death of Vladimir Lenin. He died so suddenly that the Central Committee of the Communist Party was rife with speculations that Lenin had been poisoned. But who did it? Who would want to kill the leader of the revolution? Lenin personally had answered this question. Before he died, he made a will with 2 recommendations. To dismiss Stalin from the position of Secretary General for his cruelty. And to appoint Leon Trotsky as Lenin's successor because he had accomplished the October Revolution. But the public at large had no idea about his will. Stalin had classified this sensational document. And then he started a hunt for the man who would have been the leader of the Soviet Union after Lenin. He was crying. Tears were smudging the ink as his trembling hand wrote, "Poor, poor Leon." This jaded 60-year-old man was once the most popular person in the Soviet Union. The right hand of Lenin, the organizer of the October Revolution, the leader of the Red Army and the main enemy of Stalin. Leon Trotsky spent the last years of his life in exile in Mexico. One day, he heard that his eldest son, Leon, had died during an operation for appendicitis in Paris. Leon was Trotsky's only hope, his last child. After his death, only Trotsky and his wife were still alive. His daughter Zina had committed suicide. She had gassed herself in a hotel room in Germany to avoid being tortured by the Soviet intelligence agency. His other daughter Nina died of pulmonary tuberculosis. Nina's children were shot. The youngest son of Trotsky was killed in Moscow. More than 100,000 people who were or might be acquainted with Trotsky were destroyed. All his friends and relatives, sisters and brothers were killed on Stalin's order. Trotsky's mother's grave, located in the little village of Yanovka, was demolished. And his last son Leon was killed too. Trotsky didn't believe it was due to medical complications. He felt sure that his son had been killed, and he knew that he would be next. He wiped away his tears, determined not to be frightened anymore. He left quite a legacy in the Soviet Union, such as the five-pointed red star. The broadcloth helmet, Budanovka, was also created by Trotsky, who was inspired by the Kiev Rus helmet. He wrote the oath of allegiance for Soviet soldiers, the Order of the Red Flag, and the hammer and sickle. The Red Army was also his brainchild. The era of Trotsky lasted only 10 years in the Soviet Union, from 1917 to 1927. Stalin then declared him a devil and a traitor, forbade all mentions of him, and ordered to delete him from photos and textbooks. Stalin then began to kill his children one by one. But he hadn't been able to intimidate Trotsky. Even a few thousand kilometers away from Stalin, Trotsky knew something that nobody else knew. He knew that Stalin had poisoned Lenin. Mexico, 1937. In these exclusive shots, you can see the disgraced Leon Trotsky, who had arrived in Mexico, where he would live the last 3 years of his life. Here in Mexico, his friends, famous painter Diego Rivera and his wife Frida Kahlo met with him. They invited Leon Davidovich Trotsky into their house, hired an armed guard, and made every effort to save him from potential killers. But their hospitality was short-lived. You can see how Leon Davidovich is admiring the mistress of the house. He seems a bit confused and shy. He and Frida have a 30-year age gap. She's a talented painter. He, an old revolutionary on the run. But the age difference couldn't stop their intense feelings. Frida wondered how such a peaceful old man could organize and lead the revolution in Russia. Once Trotsky started speaking, Frida felt his magnetic power. He radiated a superhuman force. Listening to the old revolutionary, Frida felt an uncontrollable attraction. Her Latin temperament forced her to make a move. At the dinner table, Frida whispered "my love" in his ear. The next day, she openly handed over a book containing a passionate love letter. At supper, she stroked his knee under the table. Leon Davidovich was overcome, but then realized that his wife Natalia had seen everything. He was confused and decided to turn it all into a joke. He clasped Frida during a dance and winked at his wife. But he didn't notice that he was getting lost in his own game. The house was silent. Trotsky was working in the office. Suddenly, the door opened, startling him. Frida locked the door on the inside, came up to Trotsky, and unfastened her dress. She whispered lustfully, "Take," but Trotsky didn't allow her to finish her sentence. At the same time, a few thousand kilometers away from Mexico, two men arrived at Stalin's office in the Kremlin. Their names were Lavrenti Beria and Nikolai Yezhov. Stalin nervously rubbed at his diseased hands. A newsletter lay on his table.
Газета, яку за кордоном видавав Троцький, а в ній прогноз невгамовного Льва Давидовича.
The foreign newspaper was published by Trotsky, forecasting the future in which Stalin and Hitler would be fighting partners and that Hitler would prevail.
Берія і Єжов усе зрозуміли.
Beria and Yezhov understood that they had to stop playing around and kill Trotsky at any cost.
Так розпочалася безпрецедентна операція.
So Operation, codenamed Duck, was set into plan.
Час пішов.
That night, while Frida was whispering passionate words about his incredible force and power, Trotsky's mind was on other things. He was thinking about himself, Leon Bronstein, as a little 8-year-old boy living in the village of Yanovka in the Kherson province of the Russian Empire. He was a quiet and dreamy child until he saw what appeared to be an insignificant country incident. That day, Leon's father, a rich landowner named David Bronstein, carried out some rough justice. He confiscated a peasant's cow that had been grazing on his field. The cow's owner entreated the landowner to return his cow, accusing David of extortion. An enraged Bronstein raised his whip, but froze. His frightened son Leon was staring at him in shock over a nearby fence. In the child's eyes, David, who had been so kind and fair, suddenly resembled a wild animal capable of murder. Back home, the boy became hysterical. He was shocked by how cruel people could be. The future mastermind of the October Revolution had just grasped the inequality of human life and realized he was one of the privileged. At the time, David Bronstein was considered a millionaire. He had more than 20,000 acres in Kherson province, a factory, a windmill, and ponds full of fish. He worked hard, saved money for his business, and expected his children to follow in his footsteps. He hoped his eldest son would become a steward and his youngest son a mechanic. But soon, everybody realized that Leon would be a troublemaker. After the cow incident, Leon kept a low profile. He read profusely, especially biographies of great warlords such as Alexander of Macedon, Julius Caesar, and Napoleon. He subconsciously compared them to his cruel and prosaic father, and he was disappointed. Leon decided to be different. He would never be money-grasping or be cruel to poor children. On the contrary, he would be kind and noble. Something was festering in his mind, and soon a row erupted. One day, David Bronstein angrily had some beggars removed from his yard. Leon then handed them some eclairs over the fence. Maybe this incident would have gone unnoticed if the father hadn't found the empty plate on the ground. David was sure that Leon was pretending to be Robin Hood. The father called his youngest son and berated him for his charity. Leon sulked. But when he noticed that his father was in a fury, he became frightened. He denied it was him and burst into tears. He felt ashamed of his lie and weakness, but Leon couldn't bring himself to speak the truth. David knew that Leon was lying to his face. David decided his son needed to go away and forget about his benign tendencies. So 9-year-old Leon Bronstein was sent to Odessa, where he was enrolled at a German school. His life changed. He suffered an acute attack in the yard. What terrible diagnosis turned Leon Bronstein into the revolutionary demon? Crime and punishment on the lesson of French. How to organize a revolution with help of ordinary beans. That day in the gym, some boys fought to see who was stronger. They screamed, "Go, Leon, go!" He jumped up and pulled himself together. Suddenly, everything went dark as pain filled his chest, making it impossible to breathe. He couldn't remember a thing. When he regained consciousness, back in his room, something wasn't right. The boy became scared when he found out what had happened. The illness that had caused the attack remained a mystery. People thought the sufferers were possessed, but it was epilepsy. What would become of him? How could he bear the caustic comments from people? He felt like a leper. Nobody knew anything about his illness, so he went to the library. In the library, he unveiled an exciting secret. In a medical guide, Leon read that epilepsy was an illness that afflicted geniuses. When he read the names of fellow sufferers, his heart leapt with joy. They included Julius Caesar, Alexander of Macedon, Napoleon, Peter the Great. Leon assumed their greatness was down to the illness. He was convinced that he must be bound for greatness. This discovery became his big secret. After his epilepsy attack, school children jeered him. They called him the epileptic. But Leon took no notice. He thought these fools should feel proud to know Bronstein the genius. Leon became self-reliant. This self-reliance soon passed to other children. Soon they stopped teasing him. Leon became top of the class at school and would help less able students. He protected younger students and began to learn how to make inspirational speeches. Soon, Leon became the leader of the class. He was happy to be the leader, as he knew that one day his name would go down in history. At the time, Leon didn't realize that fame was often short-lived. But soon, a tough lesson would wound his pride and turn the best student of the class into an outcast. Next up, Leon encourages the class of students to start howling quietly and monotonously. The French teacher is unable to find the culprit. Leon is laughing to himself with satisfaction. But the day after, his punishment is announced. He was expelled from his school, and his French teacher said that Leon Bronstein was a morally depraved person. The boy believed that it was true until he met a prison guard called Trotsky. This meeting would turn Bronstein into a monster and help him change his fate forever. The revolution would become Leon's birthday present to himself. At the end of the 19th century, schools were stern institutions. The students had to be obedient and disciplined. In class, they had to sit quietly with their hands in front of them. Leon's school was no exception. He suggested to his friends that they punish a teacher. The reason was a noble one. During a French lesson, the unpopular teacher offended one of the students. The teacher laughed at him and unfairly gave him a mark F. The class was indignant. The high achiever Leon Bronstein made an outcry against petty tyranny. But words were not enough. Leon wanted to take revenge, and so he made a foolproof plan. During the next lesson, when the teacher turned his back to the class, Leon signaled to the other students to start howling quietly and monotonously. The teacher turned. Everyone became silent. But when he turned to the blackboard, the terrible sound began again, driving him crazy. The students carried on all through the class, reducing the French teacher to tears. In despair, he ran out of the room. The students had triumphed. Leon was proud of himself. Though he hadn't exactly led an army or conquered the world, the die had been cast. The next day, the teacher complained to the headmaster and an investigation began. The school management demanded that the perpetrator come forward, otherwise all would be punished. But Leon refused to own up, so the school headmaster punished 15 innocent students. Leon was not among them because he'd been top of the class. The innocent students hoped that Leon would own up. But instead, he packed his things and went home. His friends felt betrayed and told the teacher who the real culprit was. The school head was amazed How could such a diligent boy be so two-faced? Leon didn't know that he'd been betrayed, but he slept badly that night. He felt remorse. It had been his idea. He had to take responsibility for the incident, tell the truth, and proudly suffer the punishment. But he was too weak and afraid to tell the truth. A new thought crossed his mind the following morning. He hoped the incident would have been forgotten about, as he assumed his friends would be loyal to their leader. Leon was deep in thought when the French teacher grasped him by the arm, fixed him with a look of contempt, and said, "The best pupil in the second form is a morally depraved person." The future revolutionary Leon Trotsky would remember that day for the rest of his life. A trial was arranged at the school. All his friends had betrayed him. The teacher scolded him for his heartlessness. 10-year-old Leon was expelled from the school. He had learnt two important lessons from this incident. Firstly, the leader should always take responsibility for his actions. Secondly, you shouldn't waste your talents when you have such an important mission ahead. A year later, Leon returned to school, but he had changed. He behaved well and was secretly training to become a public speaker. He read a lot of books, but had no friends. On graduating from the school, young Bronstein moved from Odessa to Mykolaiv, where he found people he could relate to. Mykolaiv, 1896. An old worker at a secret meeting took some beans from his pocket and demonstrated to young Bronstein the meaning of revolution. He said, "There is a Tsar, ministers, bishops and generals. And there are noble and merchant classes. And this pile of beans is the common people." Leon looked at the mixed beans, and he understood his mission. He didn't want to be a bean, but the hand that controlled the beans. He would rouse people all over the world, and he knew how. He would cause a revolution that would make the empire of Alexander of Macedon seem like nothing. Leon was ecstatic. The coming revolution excited all the young people of his age. In the euphoria of his plans, he didn't notice a woman who couldn't take her eyes off him. Next up, the unknown women of Leon Trotsky. Why did he leave his wife and 2 children in Siberia? Fear and loathing in Lenin's milieu. How Trotsky had neglected an opportunity to place himself at the head of the Soviet Union. Alexandra Sokolovskaya feasted her eyes upon a new member of their underground organization. They had a 7-year age gap. Sasha was an old-time revolutionary. Leon understood that this woman could be his trump card when she introduced him to the highest members of the underground movement. She was his first stage to glory. Leon was flattered at her love and devotion. Soon they became lovers. When Alessandra became pregnant, Leon lost his mind. He felt responsible, but he hadn't planned on marrying Alessandra. Should he marry her or not? The dilemma was answered when somebody reported the underground movement to the police, and all its members were imprisoned. At this point, Bronstein got married to Sokolovskaya. After a lengthy investigation, sentence was finally passed. Leon was to be exiled to Siberia. By then, he already had a child. His daughter Zina was born in prison. Soon, Sokolovskaya became pregnant for the second time. 20-year-old Leon Bronstein became the father of the two daughters. He was worried that he might have to stay in exile for many years. He knew he could become a good father and husband. But before he went to Siberia, he met a person who changed his plans and views on life. It was Trotsky, the prison guard. The prison cell was wet, filled with thieves and political prisoners. Here was homo homini lupus est. If you turned away, you'd be eaten. But only one person kept the discipline in the prison: the chief prison guard, Trotsky. He was an authoritarian and a cruel man who had in his control all prisoners, other guards, and even the prison governor. Here was an ideal leader. The overlord of the prison amazed young Leon Bronstein. Looking at the prison guard, he understood how a real leader had to be: exacting, pitiless, and self-confident. Only this way would everybody submit to his commands. Even in exile, Leon was unable to banish Trotsky from his mind. It was unbearable to think he would spend his best years there. The great mission of world transformation was waiting for him. He wrote articles about the necessity for major changes in society. Leon secretly passed these articles abroad. Another exile emigrant, Vladimir Ulyanov Lenin, took notice of the young, talented political writer. He asked Bronstein to visit. Leon started to prepare for the journey. Fellow members raised funds and made him a new passport. Leon gave himself a new surname, Trotsky. His wife cried, but let him go. She tied several sheets and pillows together and placed them under a blanket to look like a body. When the guards noticed that Bronstein wasn't around, she told them that he was ill in bed and to not disturb him. Alessandra made sure their children knew about his efforts. She outlived both her daughters, who ended up being killed on Stalin's orders because of their father's deeds. She loved Trotsky unconditionally. Leon Trotsky seldom thought about his wife and children. He was wrapped up in himself. Leon met Lenin and became his personal assistant. He began writing articles for the newspaper Spark and enjoyed a happy and free life on party expenses. In Paris, he met a beautiful noblewoman, Natalia Sadova, and fell in love with her. They never married, but lived together until their death. Natalia gave birth to 2 sons and shared his ideals. Both children were killed on Stalin's orders. Even then, Sadova didn't blame her husband.
Mexico 1937. He never seemed to grow old. Even at the age of 58, his eyes still shone and voice rang out. Frida Kahlo was thrilled that her affair had become so much more. She'd been entranced by Trotsky just like so many women before. Like the sculptor Claire Sheridan, who after the October Revolution came to Moscow to sculpt a bust of the revolution's hero. While the rest of Moscow was gossiping about their love affair, his wife pretended not to notice. Larissa Reisner was also his lover, meeting him during the Russian Civil War and glorifying him in her poems. Natalia Sadova bore this too. She knew what a philanderer her husband was. Natalia understood that they would be together despite everything. She had been his lover, wife, accomplice, and friend. But this time, Natalia rebelled against her husband's romance with a married woman who was 30 years younger than him. She didn't make a scene, but simply told her husband, "I can't bear it any longer." Leon Davidovich panicked. He told her he was devoted to her, calling himself her faithful dog and writing affectionate and erotic letters. He eventually broke off relationships with Frida. Natalia forgave him for everything yet again, but Frida's husband couldn't bear her unfaithfulness. Diego forced Trotsky to leave their house and divorced Frida when he found out about their affair. The proof of Trotsky's final passion was a self-portrait that Frida dedicated to her famous lover. The unpopular couple were forced to move to the Mexico City suburbs, where time flew by. In July 1939, Stalin was informed of the progress of Operation Duck. He received a list of possible ways of assassinating Trotsky, including poisoning, car or house bomb, stabbing in the back, headshot, strangulation, or even armed attack. Stalin approved all these methods and allotted $300,000 to achieve an outcome. In August 1939, a suspicious man appeared with a packet near Trotsky's house. The man ran away when the guards appeared. An unexploded device was found. Trotsky was horrified. He realized Stalin would never rest until he'd killed him. He remembered how the cruel confrontation had started. In 1905, the party congress was held in Finland. Trotsky was the hero of the congress, overshadowing even Lenin's fame. Later that year, the Russian Revolution began. A few weeks later, he became the leader of this spontaneous revolution. He was at the forefront of the Workers' Rebellion and became a member of the Soviet Petrograd. When the revolution was crushed, Trotsky was sent to prison and made an impassioned speech in court. The court exiled him to Siberia for life. But Trotsky escaped and came to the border on a reindeer. In the Congress, Leon was at the height of his fame. He had almost achieved victory. The whole of Petrograd listened intently to him. The crowds were applauding. One young member of the party, unknown to Trotsky, looked on enviously. It was Koba.
a dark-haired comrade from Georgia. He was not an eloquent follower of Marxism. He didn't start revolutions. Nobody in the party took him seriously. During the break, Koba approached Trotsky, who was already surrounded by admirers, and shook his hand to congratulate him. But the hero of the day didn't notice Joseph Djugashvili's timid gesture. The future Secretary General couldn't bear this humiliation. Later, during the revolution, they would officially meet. But Trotsky never treated Stalin with any respect. He laughed at his accent and his stiff bureaucratic ways. Trotsky, now in Mexico, being chased by Stalin, tried to remember when it all went wrong. How this boring Georgian had become such an indispensable assistant to Lenin. How did he seize Lenin's power? How could he commit such a crime as poisoning Lenin? In 1940, Trotsky's Über-Borgia article was published in the Kremlin, suggesting that Stalin had poisoned Lenin. Though the article was only speculative, Stalin became hysterical and ordered Beria to start Operation Duck immediately. On the night of the 23rd-24th of May 1940, a group of terrorists fired at the house where Trotsky had been hiding. Trotsky miraculously survived after his wife pushed him off the bed and threw herself on top of him. The gunmen never found them. That night, Leon Davidovich had another epilepsy attack. Natalia held him while he shook. During his blackout, he felt as though he was traveling through time back to Russia. The night of the 24th-25th of October 1917, more than 20 years earlier, had been the illustrious night of the October Revolution, which had made Trotsky famous. That same night at 11 p.m., armed soldiers and seamen were moving quickly and quietly through the streets of St. Petersburg. Trotsky led them through the city center. He scheduled the seizure of important strategic objects personally. The soldiers under his instructions had occupied train stations, the National Bank, telephone exchanges, and power plants. Even the last fortress of the Russian provincial government, the Winter Palace, was seized. By dawn, the whole city was controlled by the Bolsheviks. Nobody knew, but that night was also his 38th birthday. The October Revolution had been his birthday present to himself. Lenin had suggested to revolt on October the 27th, but Trotsky insisted on the 25th of October. He had overcome his fate and his weakness, even more so than his father. He had left his old life far behind. He was overwhelmed with joy. Mexico, 1940. Leon Davidovich regained consciousness after the attack was over and the danger had passed. The gunmen had left without taking Trotsky. The old exile knew that they would never make the same mistake again. He was sure that next time they would send not an army, but a single killer who could even be an acquaintance. The danger did in fact come from within when Trotsky's secretary introduced her fiancé Jackson to him. He felt uneasy, but put it down to nerves. The countdown to his death had begun. In 1917, Leon Trotsky had many privileges. He was glorified by the Bolsheviks, co-directed the state with Lenin. He was called the soul of the revolution. During that year, he had created the Red Army. When Leon remembered the prison guard Trotsky, he started liberating the masses from oppression. The elite and intelligentsia should be destroyed in concentration camps. In the army, the death penalty had been reinstated. Soldiers were shot for desertion, for refusal to execute an order, or for concealment of a deserter. Trotsky appointed former commanders such as Vasily Chapayev, Georgy Zhukov, Konstantin Rokossovsky, Mikhail Chukhachevsky to leading positions within the army of the Russian Empire. He also created the position of commissar, the party's inspector. Trotsky, the father of the Red Army, created an armored train to neutralize any resistance. People called it the Train of Death. Whenever the train appeared, execution would surely follow. Comrade Trotsky would then make an impassioned speech about world revolution and reward the best soldiers with awards engraved with their own names. 2 years passed. The Russian Civil War was over. Trotsky returned to Moscow a hero, where he realized that everything in the Kremlin had changed during his absence. The Politburo had become a solid apparatus. Lenin was ill, and there was no one left to keep the revolution alive. Everyone was keen to know who would succeed Lenin. At the time, Stalin was a prospective Bolshevik and the new Secretary General of the Central Committee. But Trotsky didn't attach any great importance to this. Leon led the powerful army and thought of Stalin as a mere logistics manager. But Leon Davidovich didn't know that during Lenin's illness, the Politburo was in charge. Stalin, as the Secretary General in Politburo, was responsible for a selection of issues. As opposed to the self-confident Trotsky, Stalin was being cautious. He understood that timing was everything. Stalin suggested that Trotsky have a vacation to renew his strength after the exhausting battles of the Russian Civil War and spend time with his family. But this was all part of his devious plan. Trotsky accepted the proposal. He was tired and missed his wife and children, and so he went on holiday to Tiflis. This would be his first and biggest mistake. On arrival at Tiflis, he received a shocking telegram. Vladimir Lenin had died suddenly. Leon Trotsky wanted to come back immediately, but Stalin advised him against it. In his telegram, he wrote, "The funeral will be tomorrow. You will not make it on time. Stay in Tiflis. Don't desert your family." Trotsky made the fatal mistake of remaining in Tiflis. Everyone witnessed an inconsolable Stalin following Lenin's coffin. He initiated a new Soviet parliamentary tradition whereby the person following immediately behind the coffin of the preceding leader would become the new leader himself. When Trotsky returned to Moscow, Stalin was leading the state. When Leon Davidovich returned from holiday, he heard rumors about Lenin's possible poisoning. It was said that the gravely ill Lenin asked Stalin to ease his pain and give him poison. Stalin did as he was told. The party bureaucracies, knowing about Stalin's character, surreptitiously circulated these rumors. Trotsky, irritated by these rumors, asked Stalin directly about the poisoning. Stalin had vehemently refused that he honored Lenin's request. But Trotsky would remember for the rest of his life how Stalin's eyes flashed with anger. Later, while in exile, Leon collated dates, facts about Stalin's actions, information from party comrades, and gathered evidence that Stalin had poisoned Lenin. Because of this, Trotsky's destruction was necessary. At first, he was deprived of his rank and command. Later, he was thrown out of the party and deported. Mexico, 1940. Throughout the 10 years of his exile, Trotsky continually exposed Stalin's wicked regime. While his children, relatives, and acquaintances were all killed in the Soviet Union. The intelligence service had killed his last son, Leon's true follower, during an ordinary appendectomy in Paris. And they would soon murder him. From then on, he woke up every morning appreciating life. 3 months later, their worst nightmare came true. All this time, Trotsky's secretary's fiancée was always around, and everybody had grown accustomed to him. On August the 20th, 1940, Jackson arrived at the house dressed in a hat and an overcoat, despite the overpowering heat. Leon Trotsky led his visitor to his office. At that moment, Jackson, who was actually Ramon Mercader, a secret agent hired by the Soviet intelligence service, suspiciously closed the door behind him. Trotsky started to worry. He remembered he had a revolver in his desk. He reached into the drawer. Suddenly, Trotsky realized this was the end. Jackson was wielding an ice pick. He brought it down on Trotsky's head. The pain was excruciating. The guards gathered round when they heard him cry out. A blood-spattered Trotsky fell into his wife's arms, whispering, "Natasha, this is the end." He no longer had to write articles or suffer from uncertainty and fear. Trotsky survived for 24 hours. The next day, on August 21, 1940, all Soviet newspapers announced the news. The man who had been damned by the Soviet Union workers was dead. After the funeral, Natalia Sadova discovered a new article in her husband's documents. Leon Davidovich predicted the start of the Second World War when Germany broke the peace accord with the Soviet Union. He was asking people to prepare for war. At the same time, Stalin ordered the execution of anyone who followed Trotsky's advice. Trotsky's prophecy came true less than a year later. Leon Davidovich had been a strategic genius. He had changed history. But in the end, he became a victim of his own creation, the revolution.